If you've ever built a RAG system, you definitely know this feeling. You ask a simple question, you know the answer is buried in your documents, and you get back, well, a totally useless response. It's so frustrating. But debugging it doesn't have to be a nightmare. Today, we're going to turn that frustration into a clear, systematic process for finding the problem and, more importantly, fixing it fast.
This message. We've all been there, right? This right here is our crime scene. The system should know the answer. The info's in there, but somewhere between your question and the final response, something went very wrong. And that failure, that's what we're here to investigate.
So here's our game plan. We're going to start with one single golden question that basically cuts the entire problem in half. From there, we'll investigate our two main suspects, the retrieval system and the generation model. We'll run through the 5 most common culprits, and then, to wrap it all up, we'll build your very own step-by-step debugging playbook.
You know, every good investigation really kicks off with one critical question. And in the world of RAG debugging, that question simplifies the whole landscape. It instantly tells you exactly where to focus your energy, and trust me, it's going to save you countless hours of just guessing. Okay, think of your RAG system as a 2-person team. First up, you have retrieval. Let's call it the librarian. Its only job is to go and find the right books, the right documents. Then you have generation, the expert. Its job is to read what the librarian found and cook up an intelligent answer. So the golden question is, which one messed up? Was it the librarian or was it the expert?
So your very first move every single time is to isolate the culprit. Run your query, but ignore the final answer. Just look at the documents the system retrieved before they even get near the language model. Are the right sources in that list? If they are, but the final answer is still junk, boom, you've got a generation problem. If the sources themselves are wrong or missing, then you know to start your investigation with retrieval. It's really as simple as that.
All right, let's start with suspect number 1, retrieval. We're officially putting on our detective hats and taking a hard look at the librarian. Why isn't it finding the right books? Let's follow the clues.
This is check number 1. It's the most basic, fundamental test you can run. Before you start worrying about anything complicated, just look at the top, say 5 or 10 search results. Is the document you expected to see in that list? If the answer is no, we've already found a huge lead.
Now, let's say the right document is somewhere in your database, but it's not showing up in the top results. The very next place to look is your chunking strategy. How did you slice up your long documents into smaller pieces? This is such a critical step, and it's where things often go wrong.
And chunking can fail in a few classic ways. You know, if your chunks are way too small, they just don't have enough context to be meaningful. Or if a really key piece of information gets split right down the middle between 2 chunks, neither one of them is going to rank high enough to get picked. And another thing, if you're not attaching good metadata to each chunk, your system can't do any smart filtering. Okay, let's say your chunking seems fine. The next culprit is a bit more subtle, a bit sneakier. It's what we call a semantic mismatch. This is what happens when a user's question uses different words to talk about the same concept that's in your documents. Your embedding model is supposed to bridge that gap, but sometimes it just doesn't.
Let me show you a perfect example. Your query uses the words product launch, but the document, which is exactly what you want, talks about Project Phoenix being unveiled. Now, to you and me, those are obviously talking about the same thing. But does your AI see it that way? Well, we can actually measure this with something called cosine similarity, and in this case, the score is a pretty dismal 0.42. That is low, and this just shows us the problem perfectly. Your system doesn't think these 2 phrases are strongly related, even though a person would know they are. The librarian just walked right past the book we needed.
So there we have it, a clear diagnosis, semantic mismatch. The fix? Well, you could try a different embedding model, maybe one that's been fine-tuned on your specific industry's jargon. Or you could use a cool technique like query expansion, which automatically rephrases the question in a few different ways to cover more bases.
All right, let's completely switch gears. What happens when the librarian does a perfect job? The right documents are found, the context is beautiful, but the final answer is still total garbage. Well, now our investigation pivots to our second suspect, the expert, the generation model itself.
This is the first question you've got to ask about your generation model. Is it even paying attention to the documents you gave it, or is it just ignoring them and answering from its own pre-trained knowledge? This is a surprisingly common way for things to fail.
And we can actually measure this with a metric called context answer overlap. Basically, we just check how many of the words in the final answer also show up in the context we provided.
A really low overlap is a huge red flag. It's a strong signal that the model is just making stuff up or hallucinating instead of using the facts you handed it. So, if the model is ignoring the context, sometimes the blame lies with us, or more specifically, with the instructions we give it. That final prompt that gets sent to the LLM is everything. A tiny little flaw in that prompt can cause a total system failure. Here are a few things to check for. Are your instructions strong enough? Just saying use the context is pretty weak. Saying answer the question using only the provided sources and do not use any outside information, that's much stronger. Or maybe your prompt is just too long and the important bits are getting cut off. And did you explicitly ask for citations? Because if you don't ask, you're probably not going to get them. This all comes down to a really important concept called grounding. Grounding is just the model's ability to stick to the script, to the context you gave it. And here's a great way to test this. Give it a context that you know is factually wrong, like the sky is green, and then ask, what color is the sky? A well-grounded model will say green. A poorly grounded one will ignore you and just say blue.
Okay, so we've investigated both of our suspects, the librarian and the expert. Now let's put it all together in a quick-fire lineup of the 5 most common failure patterns you're going to see out there in the wild.
This cheat sheet is going to be your new best friend. If you get one of those I don't know answers, your first suspect should be retrieval. Go fix your chunking. If the docs are right but the answer is wrong, that's a generation problem. You need a stronger prompt. Seeing hallucinations? Add that only from context rule. And any issues with citations? That's almost always a generation problem. So you just need to be more explicit in your prompt. We've covered the theory, we've identified the suspects, and we've seen the common crimes. Now, let's put all of this into a practical, actionable playbook that you can use every single time a RAG system lets you down.
Here it is, your 8-step playbook. It starts with the basics. Can you reproduce the failure consistently? Then, isolate the culprit. Is it retrieval or generation? After that, you dive in. Use your tools to trace the whole pipeline and check for those common failure patterns we just talked about. Next, validate your fix. Test it on a small set of examples and, this is so important, make sure your fix doesn't break something else. Finally, you get it into production. Deploy, monitor, and write down what you learned. This process turns debugging from a dark art into a science.
And that brings us to the end. So I'll leave you with this final question to think about for your own projects. Now that you know the key failure points, which part of your RAG pipeline is the most fragile? Is it your chunking strategy, your choice of embeddings, or is it your final prompt? Knowing your weakest link is always the first step to building a truly robust system.